Hey there neighbors, Kevin here with eTrailer, and today we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the MORryde AllTrek 4000 shock absorbing equalizer here on our 2023 Jayco Jay Flight Travel Trailer. So a lot of our neighbors come to us because they're getting an uncomfortable or bumpy ride when they're towing their trailer. Now there's a couple of ways to help mitigate that feeling, and a lot of the time most people are looking at the truck side of it and they're adding in some kind of shock absorber or some kind of other suspension enhancement to their vehicle, so that way they can just dampen that feeling that they're feeling from the trailer. But something you can honestly do that's going to make probably a much bigger difference is actually come to your trailer suspension and start swapping out some of those parts with some that can actually absorb that shock, so that way it's not traveling through the trailer frame, shaking the body, shaking stuff that you have inside of your trailer, knocking everything around in there, and then also traveling up and touching the tow truck that you're in and shaking everything inside of there and giving you that uncomfortable ride quality. So swapping out over to our AllTrek right here, this is going to give them that shock absorption and give them that much more smooth ride quality and hopefully help deal with a little bit of that chucking you might feel. I know a lot of the time when I go over the bump course after installing these, I typically don't feel it kind of trying to pull me as much because it's now hitting that rubber inside of here and bouncing back, forcing our suspension back down to the ground and dealing with that weight shift that we have between our front axle and our rear axle here. So that way we just have that much more quality or comfortable ride quality. Now taking a closer look, here are our standard components which are going to come on most trailers. Now the equalizer can kind of change shape a little bit and dimensions. So what we're typically looking for when we're wanting to replace these is our center to center from our side to side here, so our horizontal measurement, and that is going to give us where the leaf springs come out. And then with our height here, we want to measure from the center of these two up to the center of our hanger bracket here, so we can make sure we're still maintaining that same height. We're not throwing off our suspension, maybe making it too tall or too short. And then also that kind of can throw off your wheelbase measurement as well. So it's really important that you go and you double check your measurement before you go and buy anything and swap anything out, because that can really throw off how things are going to fit together, especially your when it comes to your shackle straps, because your leaf springs need a certain amount of length so that way they can kind of flow back and forth. And if it gets to be too much one way or the other, then your suspension can bind up and you're going to have a really bad time when all these components start breaking on you and you're on the side of the road trying to deal with suspension replacement and replacing wheels and tires when you should be out enjoying yourself. So one other thing I want to point out, which hasn't happened yet with this one, but it's something I see a lot here, is people won't pay attention and this hanger bolt will start to wobble free and it'll start eating right through our equalizer all the way down until it cuts it in half. And I've seen some where it's gotten all the way down to this lip and started eating into it a little bit, and that's when they've come to us and said, hey, I got a problem. Now when we look at our AllTrek, it has that cut out already, but it also has the shock absorption up top to help prevent that and keep that rebound, so it always wants to force itself right back. So this gives us that travel up and down, so that vertical travel. So when we're hitting those little bumps in the road, it's going to want to fight against that first. Now when we're shifting weight back and forth between the two axles, you'll see one of these sides come up depending on which way the weight's being forced, and it's also going to press against that rubber isolator inside of there and help dampen that and try and force it back so that we don't have that road shock just keep vibrating through our trailer frame. Now with our shackle straps, that's just completing the connection, and like I said, the length is super important. So once again, we're measuring from center to center on our holes here. Now if you're getting any wobbling, if you can reach up and you can shake this, something's wrong. You need to either tighten the bolt, maybe take a look at your leaf springs, or maybe check the bushings inside, because something is worn enough to where it needs to be either retorqued or it needs to be replaced, because you shouldn't have any kind of play really. Obviously you'll have enough play to kind of move it back and forth as the suspension is moving around, but you shouldn't be able to physically come up and rattle anything on here. What I usually see is these start to get kind of oblonged and then eventually they wear out, or like one little edge of it will just snap right out. Then your bolt is completely loose inside of here and everything else starts to wear unevenly. Usually what you'll kind of see if you're not paying attention to the suspension is you're starting to get some weird wear on maybe one of the tires, and it's just because that suspension on that side of it kind of got too loose and things are kind of moving around too much. So it's super important to just check at least once before a trip. Just give it a little once over, make sure you re-lubricate your wet bolts, keep everything nice and fresh so that way everything is working properly and maintaining that quality throughout its lifespan here, so that way you're not replacing it over and over and over again and costing yourself a bunch of extra money. But Just a little size comparison too. These are a third of the size of our new shackle straps. I don't ever expect to see one of these ones back in my lifetime here at eTrailer. These guys, I see them broken all the time. So swapping over, you know you got a lot of security, whether it's from MORryde or Dexter, when you get these upgraded shackle straps. So it's definitely a must-have in my opinion. Now for the last component, that's going to be the actual bolts. Here is the previous one that was on here before. You can see it doesn't have a grease zerk fitting, whereas our new ones do. And another thing with this is it's going to come with some bronze bushings, which we'll need to switch all of our bushings over. So you'll need to hammer out the bushings in the eyelets of your leaf springs and swap on over, because nylon bushings do not mix with grease, and grease obviously isn't going to mix with that nylon bushing. So make sure that you are using the correct ones on here. If you do put a bronze bushing onto a regular bolt here and you're not lubricating that, or say you have it on a wet bolt and you're still not lubricating that, eventually that bronze bushing is going to heat up and it's going to wear through, and it will kind of expand and just fall apart on you, or it'll disintegrate inside of there. So it's super important that if you are swapping over, that you are the person that actually comes and double checks and re-greases it occasionally, depending on your usage. Now I'm doing these two components together, even though they are separate kits, and that's because they just make sense. They go hand in hand, and that also is the same for our leaf springs here. Leaf springs are just the third essential component essentially for our suspension here, and if you're swapping out 2/3 of your suspension, you might as well just do the whole thing. If you are planning on doing that, make sure that your axle is unloaded, so you're lifting by the frame, kind of taking that weight off of it, because as you're putting weight on it, it's going to stretch and kind of bend the leaf spring down because it's feeling all that force of the weight from the trailer. And then once again, you're just measuring from center to center of the eyelets. With grease zerk fittings or just the standard bolt, you can still just use the bolt head and measure and get a general idea. From there, what you want to do is go over to your axle, and on this one you can see typically the sticker should be right in the center and on the back of the axle, and both of them are on there on these, so we could go look at that and figure out exactly what our weight capacity is for our axle to make sure that we're getting the correct weight capacity leaf springs to go along with that length that we got. Once you have all that done, swapping it out is super simple. You will just want to make sure that you also pick up some extra U-bolts, because once you undo those, they are trash. You don't want to reuse them. Swap them on over, which is also easy to figure out once you know what your weight capacity is on your axle, or if you just measure the axle tube for the diameter, you can pick out the correct U-bolts to go with it again. But with all that being said, installation, honestly not hard. It is a little bit time consuming just because there is a little bit of prep, lifting the trailer by the frame, lifting the axles, having some extra jack stands under there so you can kind of move them around and keep them supported once you are pulling out bolts and leaf springs and stuff like that. Aside from that, it really doesn't take any specialty tools. You'll need a torque wrench, a couple of wrenches, 13/16, 11/16, 3/4, sockets, and honestly that's about it. A hammer. In my case, I did have a specialty tool today. Once again, shout out to Brad. He welded on a little plate here for my sacrificial socket that I use to actually hammer in each one of these wet bolts so that I don't damage the grease zerk fitting. And like I said, that's pretty much it. So this is something you could definitely do yourself, but obviously there are some space constraints and constraints when it comes to these lifts and stuff like that. You might not have that many jacks on hand. You don't want to go purchase a bunch of jacks just to swap out your suspension. So if that is the case for you, you can use our dealer locator and find a shop near you to get it professionally installed and avoid all of the hassle. If this is something you want to do yourself and you have the time, the space, and the tools to do so, please stick around and I'll help walk you through the process. So to start our install today, I kind of wanted to preface things just because we are installing two separate kits today, but these kind of both go together, so it's essential to just really kind of do it all at once, and kind of makes sense to kind of lay it all out here for you so that way you can see in case you are in the process of maybe purchasing one or the other and just want a little bit more info to kind of get you over that hurdle to make sense that, hey, this is the right thing for my trailer. So starting off, there's a lot of prep when it comes to these installs just because you got to get your trailer lifted up, get off of the suspension. So we are lifted by the frame. You can see the I-beam right behind me here. I got one up front too. And then what I like to do personally is throw some bottle jacks under each axle because we are going to need to move our suspension up and down. We are going to be disconnecting the suspension from the hangers because we're going to be knocking out not only the equalizer but also our hanger bolts as well. So each one of those I'm going to knock all out at once because we are essentially just redoing the whole suspension right now. The only thing we're not replacing here is our our leaf springs, which if you do end up replacing your leaf springs at the same time, make sure that you also pick up some U-bolts, because once you torque them, they're stretched. You don't want to undo it and then reuse them again. It's going to weaken that, and obviously it's also going to want to fight you trying to get into that tie plate again. So once you have all of that all prepped, you got your suspension hanging, and you have some bottle jacks under there so you can kind of move the suspension and keep it held up when you knock out those bolts. From there, it's just time to actually take those bolts out. So with all that being said, I am going to get under here now. Now typically it's a 13/16 and an 11/16 wrench and socket that I'm using. You want to make sure that you put a wrench on the bolt head itself, because there's splines that are built into it, which I've got another bolt right here that you can kind of see that on, but for a reason I'll explain later, I did take a grinder and kind of cut them all down. Here, you can see it better on the new bolt, and that is going to bite into our hanger, and it's going to prevent the bolt from moving, because we don't want the bolt to move. We want the bushing to slide and then the suspension kind of roll with it. So, like I said, make sure that you keep a wrench on the bolt head, and in my case it is a 13/16, I'm pretty sure. Yep, 13/16 on that, and I believe an 11/16 on the nut side, but that can differ. Just depends on the brand that you're using. Yep, it's 11/16. So I'm gonna get under there. Make sure that you have some eye protection and some hearing protection as well. What we're gonna be doing is, once we pop that off, actually hammering it out. So it's pretty loud down here. You can easily hurt your ears. So make sure that you have all the proper PPE. All right, now that I got all of the nuts off on the back of each one of these bolts, I'm going to come back with my hammer and also my punch. Sometimes these don't want to come out because of the splines that are bit into the hanger, so you might end up needing a punch. Sometimes you can luck out and just hammer it out, no problem though. So I'm going to slide back under there. We'll pop these all out, and then we'll be able to keep moving around with our install here. The shackle strap ones, typically you can kind of move the equalizer and just pull them out. There we go, because the splines are bit into our shackle strap, so we don't have to worry about it on those ones. All right, so now it's a good time to get our bushings swapped out. You see we got our nylon ones in here. What I like to do is just take a big flathead screwdriver. This one was actually in super good shape, but this is a pretty new trailer, so that's kind of what I would expect. If you're getting down there and you're seeing maybe the thickness isn't what it used to be at some point, maybe you have a little bit of slop, especially with the shackle straps, you can jiggle those. You know you got an issue, and that could be just that the bolt itself is too loose. Maybe you need to retighten that nut on there, or maybe your bushing has worn away enough to give it play to where now the bolt's moving inside of the eyelet, and that means we need to pop it out and replace it, whether that is just with another nylon bushing or if we're swapping over to bronze bushings with a wet bolt. Now, it's also important to keep in mind if you have electric brakes, like you can see just how much tension is on this. I'm not going to come down too much more, but I don't want to have any kind of weight resting on these cables, because if these get ripped or tore up in any kind of way, then we lose our braking power. So it's best to just cut the zip tie, loosen that up a bit, and then we can re-zip tie that up once we have this back where we need it. But this is also, once again, why I was saying that you need a bottle jack, because I'm lowering this down so I can get access to that other eyelet. There we go. Now with that access, we can pop out our bushing. Just pull that right out. That one. All right, so like I said, if you're doing just the wet bolt kit, you're going to be swapping out all of the bushings if they don't already have bronze ones inside of your Equalizer. Luckily for us, the Equalizer that our neighbor went with is also from MORryde and already has those bronze bushings in place. So we're going to have some spare bushings that we're going to set aside for our neighbor. He'll have 6 total, since there's the 3 for the Equalizer that we're not going to be utilizing on our bolts today. Now, what I'm going to do is pop off the bushings that we do have, so the ones from our shackle strap ones, and then just our standard hanger bolts. We're going to take all those off, and we're going to start putting these into our eyelets on our leaf springs here. Now, what I like to do is take one of the old bolts that I pulled out. I'll take it to a grinder, and I'll just grind down those splines, so that way I can get the bushing to go all the way down to the head of the bolt. I can use that head of the bolt to hammer this into place, because a lot of the times they don't really want to slip into the eyelet too easy. So you usually have to kind of just tap it in with a hammer. And if I just tap straight onto the bushing, there's a good chance that the bushing is going to crumple and then it's going to be useless and we're prying it back out and putting a new one in. So keep your bolt, maybe take a little angle grinder if you don't have a bench grinder and just kind of grind away those splines so that way they don't bite into the bushing and honestly get it caught into it. So with that said, I'm going to hammer these in. You can just go as soon as the bolt head touches. And I like to just double check, make sure I don't got too much sticking out on one side versus the other. Now I'm using my bottle jack to lift this back up into place. I'm gonna have to kind of slide it a bit though. There we go. Now if you look at your bolt, you're gonna have a hole about halfway through it, and that is where the grease is gonna come out from the grease zerk that we have right here. So we want that to be at 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock. I try to do it whatever way is facing towards the trailer, or the front of the trailer. So in my case, I'm going to be going 9 o'clock on this side. On the passenger side, I'm going to be doing 3 o'clock. So, and one trick that they even sell you in the instructions is this lines up with one of the dashes that we have on the face of our bolt head. So there's going to be 3, and that indicates the grade of the bolt, but just a little quick tip so that way you can see exactly where that hole is when you're trying to line everything up properly. You might have to kind of play around with this too if your eyelet isn't fully lining up right. All right, so for our next part, I've got the bolt slid in, but we need to throw the flange nut on the back, and I like to just kind of snug it down a little bit, and for that you're going to need a 3/4 inch wrench. And essentially we're just taking up any slack that could be here because right now we're going to need to hammer this in so that those splines bite into our hanger. Having a little bit too much play on the backside kind of allows that vibration to just kind of not allow it to fully sink in. So I find that tightening down the nut on the backside, hitting it a couple times, tightening it down more, hitting it a couple more times is usually what I need to get it to fully bite in. This is what we're going to be doing now with our new tool here, and I'm just going to hammer this in. We'll come to the back a little bit, tighten it back up. Hit it again. And I'll kind of inspect it each time, see how much progress we made. All right, now we're going to repeat this process. We got our 2 hanger bolts. I'm going to get the other one done, then we'll come back and get all of our bolts in the center for our equalizer. Now we can take our equalizer, we're going to pop that up into place once again. Another wet bolt, make sure that you're putting that opening for the grease zerk where you need it to. That lined up. All right, that one's good. So one thing here is we have weight on our suspension, but nothing was holding it aside from just our hanger bolts initially, so suspension drops, which you can see over on the other side as well. There's obviously the weight from the axle, the weight from the hubs, and that's just going to keep wanting to drop until I have some kind of pressure holding it up, and especially once I go to throw the wheels back on, it's going to want to flip on me. I'll flip it once we start lowering this back down, but for right now, I am going to put these on somewhat backwards because our leaf springs are below our equalizer. So this is where the bottle jack really comes in handy too, because I can kind of move them up and down to get these further or closer apart, so that way I can actually get my shackle straps in. Once again, just kind of trying to decide which side is better. There's not really much you can do on this one with the grease zerk fitting just because it's already pressed into the shackle strap, and there ain't no way you're going to be able to spin that inside of this just with how thick it is. That's going to be a massive fight. So try and think about how this is going to sit once it is flipped back up. So this should, once it's back up, have my grease zerk fittings facing towards the back of the trailer, right at like closer to that 3 o'clock, sorry. And then back here, we would have closer to 9. I feel like I like that more versus facing down. I tend to want to have it a little bit higher, so at least we have some gravity. Maybe if the grease comes out towards the top, and then gravity will kind of drop it down more as it's kind of moving back and forth. This is at least my thought on it. But like I said, we're gonna get this popped in. Use my jack to lift that up a little bit. That's where we can get these lined up. I need to lower that just a smidge. Equalizer's free, so this should be moving, but we're still pinched. I think just from the leaf spring. I'm just going to tap this in a little bit. There we go. On the back side, make sure that you get your shackle strap, that on. We'll get the nuts put on, and then we can come back and torque all of our bolts all at once. And depending on what size bolts you have, they tell you essentially what socket size you're going to be using. There's going to be a different torque rating, so make sure that you are paying attention to that and getting the correct one for your specific setup. I'm going to snug these each down with my 3/4 inch ratcheting wrench here. And then like I said, we're going to come back with that torque wrench. And I am still going to put a wrench on the bolt head side, so I believe it's 13/16. Yep, 13/16 on the bolt head and 3/4 on the nut side. All right, before I forget, I am zip tying up the wiring. I want to make sure it all goes back exactly how it should, since I've lifted this back up now. So now we're going to be using some high temp grease, which you can also pick up here at eTrailer. If your situation is a little bit different, maybe you're in some wetter areas and you need marine grease, you can also grab some of that here too. And what we're going to do is go to each one of our grease zerk fittings, which 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 per side, since we have a T&M axle. And we're going to get both of these all lubricated up, and then we can throw our wheels back on. Now when you're doing this, you'll definitely want to keep an eye on it. Sometimes it doesn't want to go right directly into the grease zerk fitting. You'll see it start to pop kind of all over the head of the bolt instead. But what we're looking for is, you can see grease is already coming out over on the other side. That's telling me that we're getting it exactly where we need it to be. And I like to go until I see a decent sized glob coming out on the other end, and then from there, yeah, okay, we got some more on the bottom. Then I'll pull it off. So what we would realistically want to do is drive this around a little bit, let that grease kind of start to work its way around, and then maybe come back and re-grease it again after our first trip. Now that all of our wet bolts have been lubricated, it's time to put our wheels back on and then torque them, make sure that they are nice and tight up against our hub, so that way we don't have any issues. Don't want our wheels falling off on us while we're out on the road. But one other thing I wanted to cover, once again, your axle and the way that the suspension should be sitting. So right now you can see both my shackle straps are up. What I ended up doing was using these bottle jacks as well as a pry bar, which I don't think right here. Big old pry bar, I just stuck it in between there. And as I'm prying with this, I'm also using the jack to kind of push up on the axle. That helped me flip it back up. Now, there is the chance that as soon as I put the wheels on, the weight of that is going to make these drop right back down. So if that is the case, hopefully it won't do every single one of them like it was originally. But if it does one or two, it's a lot easier to get just that single one flipped back up once it's on the ground too. But essentially, once again, you'd just be trying to lift it up with a floor jack or bottle jack on the axle, and then using a pry bar to kind of shift it over and get this to flip back up how it should be. But with all that being said, that is going to do it for our look at and installation of both our Equalizer and our shackle straps and wet bolts. My name's Kevin, and if you still have some questions about what's going to be the right Equalizer and shackle strap setup for your specific trailer, please feel free to reach out to us via our Ask the Experts link, a comment on this video, or a phone call to our customer service department, and we'd be happy to help you out in your journey.